Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Erudition Network. Welcome to the Erudition Network Black History and Knowledge Interactive Session. Sorry about the little bit of a delay in getting on. We are on. I hope that so many of you will join us tonight as we discuss Black history and we connect it to today and the things that are going on today. There is a lot of things that that have been going on in the public over the last 3 weeks. I know we have gone over many different topics. I've tried to talk to you about history, about people who have manipulated, who have pushed propaganda, who have tried to make us think a certain way. I'm gonna delay a little bit as I'm trying to get people to come on. So we came on just a little bit, a couple of minutes later than what I would have liked, but we are here. I think sometimes when I do this show, do this podcast, I think sometimes I come off as if I am trying really, really hard to get people to participate, and I am. It is frustrating to me because what happens is there's so much going on and there's so much we don't know. And every Thursday, I get on and I'm like, okay, let me try to give a take on this historically. That, many other people probably aren't doing. And a lot of times I'm like, well, is anybody listening to this? Is anybody paying attention to this? And it becomes disheartening because, I do a lot, even outside of this particular broadcast. I field a lot of questions and talk about a lot of things to a lot of people. You would be surprised in many parts of the world as far as it goes with history. And a lot of times it really just seems as if it's a fight that you sometimes don't feel like you're winning until you hear from someone, as far as Bahrain or in Africa, or we've had people who have reached out to us from England and different places and asked about the African diaspora, the African American experience, and that keeps this going. If I were really to be honest with you, I have asked on several occasions. I think I got on earlier today, and I asked people if they would actually, because I think maybe sometimes it's chat. Maybe they can't get their words right in chat. And I asked individuals if they would come on and just be on the show where we can feed them in. Whereas we didn't even need to have them on their actual video or picture of them, just your voice, right? Because I really want this session to be interactive. I know the questions are out there. I field so many questions sometimes just from chat, just people who chat me up or chat up the Erudition Network message, right? And we answer those questions. So I know that the interest is there. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that a lot of times we're engaging with a hope that other folks will engage back. And I still hope that. I still think that is happening. I just would like us to be more open about what is needed and what is wanted, and allow us to help you to gain knowledge. Hi, Taisha, how you doing? I'm glad you're here. A few months, about a year ago, my son asked me or gave me a suggestion for this particular session that I do every Thursday. And his point was that can we go over and do something that can answer questions for people who are going to school or not going to school, but people are going to school every day and not getting the full 411 information on our history. And looking over their books and looking over some history books, I realized that absolutely was not happening. And so I committed myself to doing this. And this is what we've done. All right. Well, I tried to give you guys some time. I wanted you to understand where I'm coming from. I want to continue to do this broadcast, but I also want us to engage. Even if you're watching the replay, I want you to engage. I know there are questions out there. I know there's curiosities about something. And I want you to engage here as well as when you send me stuff on social media to ask a question privately. Because those questions that you ask me privately are questions that people should be hearing socially. So let's do that. Let's please do that. Anyway, tonight, I really could go anywhere in history with you tonight. But I'm going to talk about a question that was sent to me earlier today. Earlier today, I received a question from a brother who wanted to know, was there any historical evidence of Christ, of Jesus? It was a good question. And as we, his point was he wanted to know, was there any archaeological, any written account, anything outside of the Bible? Because very often people cite the Bible as it goes to Jesus, but was he a real person historically? Many of the Christians out here immediately will tell you, yes, he was. Yes, yes, yes. And I will even tell you, yes, he was. But few can give us the actual evidence as to what validates that. And if that makes you mad, let me give you this. In the world of academics, in the world of history, people are going to ask you for facts. They're going to ask you for reality, right? When did this happen? How did this happen? Is this a real thing? And so I looked at his question and I took it to heart for what it was. And as I explained to him, there really is not, how do I phrase this? There are things in the world that suggest that Jesus was a real person archaeologically. Right? There are things that have been used by the Catholic Church in different parts of the world that suggest that Jesus actually lived, and these are remnants of Jesus. However, and that's the painful however, many historians for centuries have said that this is pseudo science, pseudo history. And so a lot of them dissuade us from actually digging deeper into this. But there is evidence that is there to suggest that something happened. Some will say, I'm sure you have heard about the Shroud of Turin, the crown of thorns, which the Catholic religion has said show that Jesus did exist. However, at the same time, there are people who will tell you that is not the case because science cannot prove, or science is disproving that the shroud was as old as they say it is. or they will tell you that these are holy relics that were used to draw people into the church and were known to be false, um, false uh, uh, artifacts. Could not think of the word to use for that. And it's not that I'm trying to be politically correct. I'm trying to be very accurate with you, and letting you know that this is what is said, because a lot of Christians get mad when you say that there's no proof archaeologically that Jesus, existed. But we're not saying that there's no proof of Jesus. We're saying that science in itself is saying that they can't prove it. But that's whatever, because though the primary source of it may not be something that they can necessarily talk about, there are secondary sources. Historians try to draw relevance. We try to figure out, is there something that is inferred? Is there some writing? Is there some recognized similarities in history? Is there something there that can lead us to knowing that this person existed? We know that people who are mentioned in the Bible, Pontius Pilate, Caesar, these are real people. These were real estates and real things in history. However, we still have to draw those connections, because many will try to use the absence of a primary source of Jesus's actual spoken words written down by Jesus, cloaks and artifacts left from him, as a way of saying he didn't exist. And so I have to be very specific in what I'm saying, because it is important that we understand that. So when I was asked that question today, I keep really good notes on my history. Not only do I read a lot, but I actually take a lot of notes down. And I try very hard to make sure people understand where I'm getting my sources from. And so what I told him is there are many, many links, right? There are many, many things that show. There was just recently, within the last 4 years, there was a dig done that actually pulled up archaeological evidence, right, of how of a crucified individual. And this was discovered in Rome. Excuse me, in Italy. And what it showed was a person who was actually crucified and penetrated in the exact same way in which Jesus was penetrated. And so the ideas of crucifixion, we know, are factual. We know that the Romans performed crucifixion. But a lot of historians will tell you that the crucifixion decimated, destroyed, obliterated people. And very few bones or evidence could have been discovered, because the Romans were known to completely devastate these people and then sometimes bury them in very obscure places, hang them, dismember them, and do things to the bodies well after the actual death. So some historians for many years would tell you that, well, the reason why you would not find any evidence of Jesus was because he wasn't there. There was nothing left of him. We don't know that. The Bible tells us that he was taken down and he was put in a tomb. And we have to take that as the record of, in 3 Gospels, that tells us that that's exactly what that is. So we have to take that at face value and accept that history, that Christian history. But when we pull up the bones, when we show the evidence, and I'm going to actually post the link of an article, not the actual study, but the article will take you to the study of will take you to the study uh, that was done about these bones in Italy and Venice and there was Rome. And so you can understand um, that there is connection. So why do we care about that? Well, we care about that because the idea of it is if it was described in the Bible, if it was described in those writings so specifically, and we find bones of people who were crucified in that specific manner, then it validates us to understand that there may be validity in the story outside of the primary source material, outside of if Jesus really existed by what everybody's definition may be. You have something to look at and say, hey, look, they actually did crucify people like this. And and everybody wasn't destroyed, beheaded, dismembered, burned. Crucifixion was a horrible, horrible process. It was meant to humble the criminal. It was meant to maim, dismember, and leave the criminal completely destroyed psychologically and physiologically. It was one of the most horrendous ways of being killed in that time of history. So having evidence of that in any area of Roman control is highly important in the suggestion of if Jesus actually went through this. And that is one step in proving the existence of Christ historically. The other thing that I told him was that you can also look at writings. You can actually pull up writings of people who were around um, during that history. Didn't they have his garment on display in a museum at one point, and it got dangerous to keep it there due to fanatics? If you're talking about the Shroud of Turin. The Shroud of Turin is still around, and it is a very interesting um, um, artifact because it actually, no matter how many times they try to date the Shroud of Turin, it creates a controversy because in order to create the image of the man that is seen or the image that comes out in the shroud, you would have to paint it very, very smallly on threads of of material. And given its age, there is no way that that could be done. The argument for Christians has always been that this was the shroud that contained the body of Jesus, and as Jesus rose, the energies are from that bled into the actual shroud or left an image on the shroud. Some have argued that it is blood, but they have traced to see if there was actual the blood on there. But that is also a issue of controversy. It's a good question, Tina, but the bottom line is it is one of the artifacts that is always argued. There's always fringe theory. There's always people going against it because they don't want to believe it. And the only way for you to see that image is to hit it with ultraviolet light in order to see it. So, in other words, for hundreds, if not 1,000 years, people didn't even see the image. The image wasn't even seen. And so what wound up happening was that it just looked like cloth. And then as we got into modern day testing and looking at it, those pictures that you see of the shroud, and I don't want to get too much into the shroud, are based on ultraviolet photography and light that show this image. Well, that wasn't always available. So there are many things to consider with that, but that is an actual good question. Not saying that there were any bones. What I'm saying is that the image of what is on that shroud is permanent. Is permanent. That's what I'm saying. That's a good point. Thank you for coming on and making that point. But as I said earlier, we have to look at those particulars of history and those things and take them because there's so much controversy about it. You have to take that by your own faith and desire to know that. I truly believe that the shroud and artifacts like that stand out because what they do is that they actually show us evidence that Jesus did. There was something supernatural about that shroud, but that's neither here nor there. What we're talking about tonight, we're talking about the other evidence that goes to suggest that Jesus actually existed. And one of the things that I spoke with the individual about, or left him a message earlier, was Tacitus. Most of you do not know, if you're not a historian, do not know who Cornelius Tacitus was. But Cornelius Tacitus was a Roman historian. And he wrote about the history of Rome. He was known as a very credible Roman historian. And Tacitus actually wrote about Christ. He did not call him Jesus because the Romans, it wasn't his desire to go that far into it. And that is the important part. Because Tacitus was not necessarily a Christian, his takes on Jesus or Christ are very important because that meant that this was taken purely from a historical framework. And that has to be appreciated because what Tacitus was trying to say was that Christ, or Christus as he called it, was the founder of this religion. What Tacitus was actually writing about when he noted Jesus was he was giving an account of Christians who the Emperor Nero was killing and murdering. And Tacitus, in trying to dictate who these people were, he called them Christians. And he said that it was derived from the name of Christus, who was a Jewish man who was believed to be the Messiah or Christus and had led this religion. So that notes that there was documentation that Tacitus picked up or pulled that showed that Jesus had actually existed as far as it goes with Roman history. And in his annals, right? In the annals that Tacitus wrote, he actually quite literally writes that in there. So that again shows us, right, that there is, and I'm trying to type this in here so I can give you guys the link to that he actually saw it. And I was trying to pull up the actual part. He said Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations. They were called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our prosecutors, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out only in Judea and the first sources of evil, but it is now even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful for every part of the world find their center and become popular. He had to talk about Christ. And we know that when Tacitus put this in here, he had no love for Christians, as you see, right? He called it an evil source. But as a historian, he had to note it for who it and what it was. So when historians ask the question if there was a Christ, and they try to blow over, We have to look at the historical records from people like Tacitus, Herodotus, right? Josephus, those people who lived in those times that give us what we need to know. Nathan, back in those days, his name was not Jesus, but he wouldn't call him Jesus anyway, because he wouldn't go so far as to trying to find out what his Jewish name was. No matter what it was, no matter what he was being called. That was not of his interest, but it's a good point, Nathan. The I am Jesus and the Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity exists and act in past, present, and future. They knew not to keep powerful, tangible existence here. So lack of lots of evidence is also part of the faith. Yeah, that is possibly true, but there are things in the Bible that God has said would stand and be here as evidence of God's presence. So we can't necessarily say that. What we can say is that much of man has never been invested in proving that Jesus is Christ. That's just the truth. And so many wars and things have been waged on the name of Christ, and things taken and stolen and put apart, that it would be hard to go in and even find some of those things, unless, it goes to your point though, God wanted us to. But there is enough evidence here for us to understand that yes, this person existed, regardless of machinations, lies, deceits, things that have been hidden or tried to be disproved in history. The purpose of this lesson tonight is to give you these other historical records. You can't look at Tacitus's records of the Roman life and take some of the things that he said that are proven to be true, and then completely disqualify the fact that he mentions Christus in his narrative, right? And so that people can know in these annals that this existed and that this happened within the Roman Empire, because Tacitus was a Roman. He had no fellowship or desire to be connected to Jewish life. Matter of fact, he even calls Christianity evil, but he had to document it because there were many, many Christians, which goes along with what the Bible tells us. So we have to take that for what that is. Now, if we look at Tacitus, right, and we look, and I'm still trying to share this. I'm going to share this here in the chat. A link to Tacitus's actual record, because this is what I sent to the gentleman today. And I thought this was a really good subject for the audience. Here's a link to Tacitus's actual annals. Well, one part of his annals, his 15th. And you can go in there and read that part. Go search the word Christus, and you will see where Tacitus wrote that. And those thousands of your old documents, so that, again, we can continue to say and prove that by secondary source that this was a real person who lived, walked, and was among us. Not just based on faith that it was, which is great, but the idea of knowing historically, yes, because there's effort to disprove historically that he was not. So that's the purpose. The other person who wrote extensively about Jesus was a man named Flavius Josephus. Flavius Josephus was a historian within the first century after Jesus's crucifixion. As a matter of fact, the reason why Flavius Josephus is often used by many who are willing to read, is because he lived within 30 years of the death of Jesus. Flavius uh, was a Jewish historian. And again, not necessarily a Christian, but a historian who wanted to prove that things happened in that period. So Flavius was, or Josephus as he's mostly called, Flavius Josephus was actually put um, on he's writes in many of his records in his Antiquities of the Jews. He talks about Jesus. He talks about Jesus's brother James. He gives an account of the crucifixion, and he goes in to add another historical record. You may ask, why am I stressing the idea of the historical record? Because the reason that many people do not want to listen is the first thing that they will say is, and I've heard it, Jesus didn't even really exist. He wasn't even a real person. You need to be able historically to know that this is in fact a lie. That is not true. That is not true. And if they say, well, we have no direct primary account, you have many people in history that you have no direct primary account, but you have secondary account of what they did. Historians writing stories about Caesar, Mark Antony, and the list goes on and on and on and on. Alexander the Great. There are stories that are written. There are things that are said about these men that were written secondarily. A source who was a recognized expert or historian in that field who wrote down and annotated who these people were. The Bible, in many ways, has secondary sources to prove the existence of people. When you go and you read about Pontius Pilate in the Gospels, and then you can go and look and see that Pontius Pilate was an actual person, an actual leader within the Roman the Roman society. Do you understand that there is power in those secondary sources? But as we go back into Josephus, Flavius Josephus was important. He had no skin in the game. But when he references Jesus' his brother James, and recognizes that Jesus was called the Christ, it's so important for a Jewish historian to write that. So when you read Flavius's 20th volume of the Antiquities of the Jews, and you get to understand, wow, he really wrote this down. To me, as a person who looks for and searches for that type of history, that is huge. That is huge. It's a huge argument. He actually wrote, and I was trying to pull some of this up. The name of those sons were James and Simon, whom Alexander commanded to be crucified, AD 48. But now Herod, king of Claudius, removed Joseph, the son of Communus, from high priesthood and made Ignatius, the son of Nebus, his successor. And he basically goes on to initially mention James. But there's another part. It's in chapter 9. I was looking for it. I wasn't breaking it up. When therefore Annas was of his disposition, he thought he had now a proper opportunity to exercise his authority. Festus was not dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, with whom James and some others and some of his companions, and when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. It is important to know that a prominent historian, right, was recognizing what was going on historically. So even if there was no written words of Jesus as we see it, there was history of Jesus being written within 20 to 30 years of his death that allowed us to know that he actually existed. We're not talking about the same Joseph, Tina. But ask Joseph if Jesus was real. If no one could not believe it, it would be, oh my God, you got jokes. But that's just the fact. We're talking about historical facts here of that you can go in and pull up. And this is the thing also. I see a lot of you all out here, and I appreciate it. You go out and you get books and you get things that that I suggest. By all means, do that. But what I do try to do is I try to give you a free way of reading this material, especially if it comes down to something dealing with white supremacy, because I do not like to put money in the hands of white supremacists. So I will always try to give you a way to acquire the written word freely, always. And I believe that I put the link in here for you to be able to go in and pull up the data that was written by Josephus. And I'm going to put another link in here. And I'm going to tell you that you need to go and read this for yourself and not assume that I'm just telling you what to do or where to go, making it up to you. I do that because history is not just because for me to sit here and talk to you and give you history. It's also for you to go in and pull that data for yourself. When you go in here, I'm going to type that too. When you go in here, I want you to search for the names of James and Christ. You can read the whole thing, but I want you to do that so you have a better understanding on your own. And then I just put that link. It's from the right online, and you should be able to go access that information. Share it with your friends when we finish this broadcast. Share it. We may have a few people in here tonight, but share it. There are Christians out here when they are asked questions about the history and the validity of Christ that struggle to defend it as a real person. So I'm giving you this tonight because as I spoke with the gentleman who actually had me to go look for this information again out of my notes, I thought it would be something tonight we definitely needed to talk about because a large part of the audience are Christians and who want to know these historical facts. The other thing about, before we get off of Josephus, let's also point out the fact that even though he talked about it heavily when he made the point in chapter 9 in the Antiquities of the Jews, he also went even more deep when you go and you read some of his other works. It is often challenged by historians, but chapter 3 of Josephus's Jewish Antiquities, he goes even further. He gives a very, 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 I'm not going to read it, deep description of Pontius Pilate. He talks about the sedition of the Jews against Pontius Pilate concerning Christ and how all of that played out. He gives a huge record of this. Now, the reason that I did not list this as the first is because anytime we have something like this, there are folks in society who want to challenge it. You will hear people tell you that chapter 3 of Josephus's works in the Jewish Antiquities, Christians over the centuries have gone in and manipulated that. There's no evidence of that at all. These are ancient works that come from the first century. Again, I will tell you again, 30 to 40 years after, right after the crucifixion of Christ, of Jesus. So for you to go and to assume that those works are, you can blow them away, but everything else in the work is accurate, completely accurate, is a lie. But I'm going to give you the link for that also. And I want you to read chapter 3. I want you to strengthen your understanding of this subject, because in that chapter, he really does talk to you about what was going on with Pontius Pilate, how that played into the crucifixion of Jesus, and how that aligns with the Bible. Those things are important. They're important. I sent this information out earlier today to a brother, and I was very happy to help. I am often, as I said at the beginning of this show, I do a lot of historical work outside of this particular program. And I do it because I want to strengthen us. I want to make us better. But there are times with this that I feel that maybe I should do something different. So I'm going to beseech you again. If you are a follower, if you watch this as a replay, we have four or five people on tonight. I'm going to ask you that you get interactive with us, please. That you share our program, that you help us to grow. There is a lot of work that goes into research. There's a lot of work that goes into pulling this data, and I do this willfully and for free. There are people who get paid to do this, but I find it to be so important for us as a culture. There's a book I have back here. You may see it sitting on one of my stacks of books that sits on my desk, and it's called The Modern Researcher. And The Modern Researcher is a great book. It is a collegiate book. It is the book that a lot of historians utilize, and learning how to go in and peruse data from all over the world, from libraries all over the world. The blessing is that now we have access to libraries all over the world digitally. I can go to the Library of Cambridge Library. I can go to the Library of Congress. I can go and look in the libraries and all throughout Europe, Germany. I can go and pull information from libraries in Africa, in the Middle East. This is what we do. This is what we do. And I don't want you to assume that Erudition's job is just for me to get on here to bloviate with you. I want you to engage. We are at a crossroads here in America where people do not want us to learn history. They are fighting us every day to learn history. When you go and you ask your children about our glorious revolution, when you go and you ask them about the Renaissance, the Reformation, when you go and you ask them about the kings and queens of England, and you may be surprised that they may be able to actually tell you something about those people. But when you ask them about Black Americans, when you ask them about ancient African kings and queens, when you ask them about how things came about in the way they did for our cultures, and they can't answer it. That's why we do what we do. That's why we research the way we do. A couple of months ago, I shared a book with you written by a woman, a conservative woman, who wrote a book from 1619 to 2019. She wrote a book on Black history, and she pinpicked what she wanted out of there. She put another Black woman's face on the book as a co-author, but she basically told a conservative, racist, bigoted, revisionist idea of Black history. And what is unfortunate is that her book was actually used in schools. So when I get on here to teach history, I'm reminded of that. And when I looked at the book, I said, wow, this was an effort to get people to accept the idea that, one, slavery wasn't necessarily wrong. The Civil War wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights. The people who fought for the South were not racist on whole. Leaving out the Black and Tan movement, leaving out the efforts of the Republican Lily White movement, leaving out the lynchings and the murders that happened purely because of racism, and saying that they happened because people felt their rights were being trampled on, and not the fact that racism or the identity of color was a major part of it. This is being taught. And every day, I'm faced with this. I appreciate every one of you who sends me comments on chat. I appreciate every one of you who share the program. But every week I'm feeling I have to get on and stress to you the importance of this history. I can put out a course that people can pay for. I can isolate my time to doing something else. But I get on here every night on Thursdays and I try to talk to you about what has happened in our history. I try to give you an understanding of where we were before 1619, because that's the standard word. The issue of Jesus being Black or white is something that I think is pointless. If you consider the fact that the area in the world that Jesus lived in at the time was still Africa, the better question would be to say, was Jesus an African or born of African lineage? And I would have to tell you, yes. Given what the Bible and what records show us from that area of the world. And that right there angers people. But then again, that comes down to the idea of who's actually studying history. Recently, my wife was looking at a woman who was on talking about how did Africa get its name. This was an educated woman. This was not a woman who didn't know anything. But she definitely did not know how Africa got its name. She definitely did not have an understanding of the Roman and the Phoenician, the Punic Wars and everything that happened. But that wasn't for her to know, because that's not what she was taught. She only knew what she was taught. And so she's thinking that names came out of somebody came up with it. I think she mentioned Jesse Jackson and Africa, this and that, but nowhere is it actual history, because we get taught a stovepipe version of history. And unless we ask the questions, unless we engage to find out, or somebody is willing to teach us, a lot of us don't know. A lot of us don't know. And so when you start talking about how the Romans used the name Africanus, right? And how they utilized that. In the Bible, most times Africa was referred to as Ethiopia. Africans were talked about as Ethiopians. And there's a long history that will go beyond what we are able to do here tonight. There's belief that Africa was once called Akabulan, but that might have been internal. The point is, if you don't know all of these things, because you're definitely not taught it, when you talk about Britain, it is believed that Britain, right, it was actually named based on the Phoenician travel there, because this is where they got their tin. So the etymology of these names, the things that come from these names, right, is important. But you don't know unless you are taught. You don't know unless you ask, which is why we started this program as an interactive. That's what it was for, to engage you, to be able to gain knowledge that we can provide to you, places to go. And one thing you will never find on Erudition is every time you ask us something, I'm going to give you a place to go look. I'm going to give you a book. I'm going to give you somewhere to go. And I'm going to do it in a way where you can access it as freely as I possibly can make it. That takes research. That takes time. But I think that history should be free. Knowledge should be something that we gain. We have to do better about that, ladies and gentlemen. I think we can. I think we can. So we're coming at the end of this hour. There really, other than my wife, there really hasn't been any questions. And really, honestly, for the last 2 sessions, we've not really had a lot of interaction with people coming on. It's just whatever it is. And I want you to review this. Go and look at those links that I gave you. Please look at those links that I gave you. It's short reads. I almost gave you the exact place to go because I want you to learn. And get on there. Get you some knowledge on how to, when people tell you something, they don't know who Flavius Josephus is. They don't know who Claudius Tacitus is. But I guarantee you, once you know who they are, and those arguments come up, and somebody says, well, how do you know that? You get them to read. You get them to understand. History is written down from all areas. There are historians, ancient historians on all sides. The only thing that is missing is people's engagement. It's folks' engagement in the truth. That's all it is. That's all it is. History existed before the coming of Christ. Written history. You have Homer, you have Herodotus, you have Pliny, you have Diodorus, you have Josephus, you have Tacitus, you have all of these people who wrote this history down. I was reading once, it was from the historian Diodorus Siculus, in which he was talking about the beauty of the Ethiopian, the African. And that his point was, it stands out to me because he believed that the Ethiopian saw themselves as being greater than history of any other nation because they believed that they were the oldest people He wrote this thousands of years ago. He understood the importance of the African, the importance of that early man. He understood that Nubia, Sudan, Ethiopia, whatever you want to call it, that this life came from, it needed to be written down. When you read ancient Greek myths that Homer wrote, and we weren't taught this in school, and Homer's referencing lands, minos, kingdoms that we all assumed were Grecian, when in fact, he's talking about across the Mediterranean, in areas like Libya, Algeria. He's talking about ancient Africa. He's talking about shipping kingdoms like the Phoenicians. But you don't know this. You don't know this unless you engage. When Herodotus writes it down as a historian and says that blacks, Egyptians, are very close to Ethiopians, and that they were black, but yet you watched movies and you see people who look white playing Egyptians. Herodotus was a Greek historian, but he understood the importance. He called them black and of beautiful curly hair. He almost wrote the exact description that the Bible gives about what Jesus was supposed to look like, or what the Christ was supposed to look like. I think it is just important for us to share our history. And I don't want you to take it for granted. I don't. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at that hour. I hope you got something from today, because this is my last time beseeching people to want to seek knowledge for themselves. From here on out, I'm going to go about teaching the lesson as they are, regardless of interaction. If you don't choose to interact, you will just get a lesson. I can record those and not get on here live. And if that's the way we're going to do it, then that's the way we're going to do it, because I want this to be of some worth. So I'm going to ask you, those who are watching, beseech your friends, beseech those who are out here who you know are supportive of us, to come on. Even if it's not the live show, ask a question. Ask a question. Gina, you stepped one in here just before we was getting ready to leave out. And do you think that one reason they don't teach these things in school because they don't know themselves the history of mankind? They didn't realize the depth of history, the history of the world. I do believe that there is some of that. I believe that, as I remember when we first started Erudition, Gina, I said that we're in a circular way of thinking. We continually repeat the same way of thinking, right? It's like with Black History Month. We talk about Dr. King every Black History Month. Or we talk about Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass. We go to the familiar names, and that's the whole of that micro universe of Black history for us. And we don't talk about the other parts of Black history. We don't talk about the Carthaginians. We don't talk about the Phoenicians. We don't talk about our place as Africans in the history of this world, because it has never been believed to be important. And only within the last 100 years, where Black scholars like W.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, William Leo Hansberry, Francis Krauss Welsing, Dr. John Henry Clark, where people started to ask these questions. People say so many strange things about Africa, but rarely saw how beautiful it is and how it evolved to be that way over time. It would, I'm sorry, it would be nice if you would, but we have, and I will continue to do that, Tina. We do. We have gotten on here many times and talked about Africa. When I talk about, and now you guys got me on a little bit longer, but I feel this is a good point. It's important to know, right? I spoke a couple of weeks ago about when Homer, when he was talking about Memnon and one of his many myths, he talked about the beauty of blackness. A vision, what did he say? A vision of sad but sable hue, short, woolly, curly hair, overfleeced with blending hair. He talked about the beauty of the country. He talked about the wonder and the splendor. That was Homer. But what you hear from Homer, our kids are taught, are the Iliad, the Odyssey. And never once do we go into Homer's other works where he talks about us, our ancestors, the beauty and the wealth and the purpose of Africa. So, and agreeing with both of you, and I appreciate both of you also, you, Gina, Auntie, and I appreciate both of your questions. That's why I stress this so much. I want us to learn. But if interactively we're not doing it, I got to find another way to reach out, to engage us. And I'm fighting because I don't want to stop this interactive. I want us to be interactive. I really do. I encourage you all to join us next week. As I said, I will be actually teaching a lesson next week. Hopefully it will be live. If not, I will judge that we may just record one and put it on Thursday. I really would like us to be live and interactive. So please encourage folks to join us and get on here, even if they get on and ask a question later on. Even if you're hitting up the rebroadcast on YouTube or whatever, ask your questions. I promise you I will see them, and I promise you I will answer them. You all, thank you for those who joined us tonight. Thank you for giving me of your time. I really do appreciate it. If it seems like I'm just beating at you, it's because I know history is so important, and I want us to understand how important it is. But until next week, I want you to go out, read those links that I put in. Go research that for you Christians out there. Give yourself something to argue when people make that ignorant statement that there is no historical evidence of Christ. All right, I'm getting off my soapbox. You all have a great and wonderful rest of your week.